Hey guys, Coffeeyay here. I'm bringing with you the video from the Beating Spin&Go's video pack, What You Need to Know. This video is going to be talking about the kind of non-strategic things that you really need to know about Spin&Go's to really make sure that you're beating them. So first off, really simple stuff, just registration. How do you register for Spin&Go's? Well, it's just so simple. You just select your stake, whatever you're interested in, and hit register. It's a blind registration, so there's no game selection whatsoever. You can't choose to play against specific players or not play against specific players. And so your opponents are just going to be completely random. Everyone has an equal chance of playing against both weak and strong players. This means you'll play against a wide variety of players. You'll need to really have a full skill set because you will sometimes play against strong players. That being said, the majority of your opponents will likely be weak. Despite this registration process, it's a very popular format. You'll be playing against many recreational players who are playing just for fun. All right, so let's get into the most important thing in some sense in Spin&Go's. What makes them Spin&Go's is the prize pools. So Spin&Go's, first off, are a winner-take-all format. So there's no ICM, nothing like that. The person who, there's 3 people. The first place winner gets everything. Now, there's a little caveat to this. In the 3 biggest prize pool at every stake, because the prize pool is so big, they do have a prize for second and third. However, it's an equal prize size for both second and third, and so it actually doesn't affect strategy at all. Essentially, the way it works is when you hit the biggest Spin&Go's, everyone gets some money, and then you play a winner-take-all game for what's left over. And that's the best way to think about it. Even if you lose those big ones, you'll have a consolation prize. But in the end, when you're in those big prize pools, you still should be focusing on being the winner, taking all the money, and those second and third prizes really just shouldn't affect you at all. There'll be a nice prize afterwards if you fail to win. So the way it works is upon registration, your prize pool will be chosen based upon certain probability distribution. And so, certain multipliers, they're also called, are more likely than others. And the most common prize pools are the lowest ones. And then, the bigger prize pools are less and less likely. And so this creates a lot of excitement. When you start out, you never really know what you're going to be playing for. And you never know if, this might be your day and you'll be playing for the highest prize pools. At the $30 games right now, their prize pool is up to $108,000, with the first place being $90,000. So that's 3,000 times your buy-in. There's also right now a promotion going on that has a $1 million one where the biggest prize pool is $1 million. I don't really recommend playing those. I think it's mostly just marketing. The rake is significantly higher than at other games of comparable stakes. But anyway, so that's the idea behind the prize pools. Make sure to check out the PokerStars website to find up-to-date prize pool probability distributions. Just to make sure that they haven't changed. And if they introduce new stakes, you'll know what the prize pool is. And one thing to remember is that each game has the same probability of a big prize pool as the next one. There's no sort of jackpot or anything like that. Every game is independently determined. So every next game you play could be that big one. Or it could just be another small prize pool, two times the multiplier. So with that being said, these prize pools changes do actually cause some effects for strategy. So first off, there's some population tendency things. People play a little differently in different multipliers. And so in the low prize pool games, players tend to play looser and more aggressively. You'll get sort of more people who just want to kind of end it, who are in a hurry, who will be more reckless. And so you should be adjusting your strategy by oftentimes widening your calling ranges, increasing the size of your value bets, because a lot of players won't be paying much attention, be willing to pay off big bets. And in general, not bluffing as much, because they're not going to be as happy to fold. If they have pairs and things, they want to take them to showdown. They want to catch you bluffing. So be careful with that kind of thing. On the other hand, in the high prize pool games, players tend to play tighter and more passively. There's a little bit of this kind of scared money effect. You know, you get one of these really big ones, it's a big sum of money, and people tend to be a lot more cautious. Now, that's not a complete rule. There's some players who will be just as crazy in the bigger ones. But in general, this is a pretty big effect, and again, worth adjusting to. So you're just going to want to adjust by bluffing a little more often, calling with tighter ranges, not bluff catching as much, because they're not going to bluff as much. And using smaller bet sizes in general value hands, because if you use too big ones, you can scare them off and not make them want to pay you off. So that's a really big thing to take into account. So that's sort of how people play differently. That being said, there's actually room for you to play differently as well, to try to maximize your hourly. So the idea is that in high prize pool games, because they don't happen very often, you should be trying to maximize your win rate. You shouldn't be thinking about, making as much, making as many chips per hand or anything like that. You should be trying to do everything possible to make sure that you have the highest in the money percent in that game as possible. And so what this really means is that when you have close spots, spots where the EV of different actions is very close, you should make sure to choose the action with the lowest variance. Now, you don't want to overdo this. It's very easy to start, taking hands and saying, oh, you want to pass up on a small edge to get a big one. These are fast formats, and so you really shouldn't be looking to pass up any edges. But in places where things are close, where you're not sure what's best, where, you think that one option might be only slightly better than another one, it's well worth choosing the action with the lowest variance. And so, as an example, pre-flop, you're going to want to shove less often. In terms of pre-flop actions, shoving always has the highest variance because, you can win and lose the maximum amount possible very quickly. Post-flop, other situations that come up, hero calling and thin value betting are also sort of fairly close spots. Like when you're looking to hero call, you're trying to call in places where you think your opponent might be bluffing slightly too much. Those are, again, going to be pretty high variance plays because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And either way, your chip stack will swing more often. And so in general, you're going to want a hero call in those close spots less often. And actually, similarly, you want a thin value bet less often. Real thin value bets are ones where, the equity of betting and checking are usually very similar. Not betting and betting can lead to very similar results. But again, thin value betting will still lead to higher variance because sometimes you get called by hands that beat you. And sometimes you'll get called by hands that you beat. And either way, your chip stack will fluctuate more than if you just checked back and took your showdown value in a lot of situations. On the other hand, the opposite of this is in the low prize pool games, especially the minimum prize pool, you should be looking to minimize game length and maximize your edge per hand. That's where you really want to try to, make as many chips as possible per hand. And if at all possible, you want to try to take the actions that, don't take as long. And so in close spots, you're going to want to choose the action that is the highest variance as opposed to the lowest, because that'll cause the game to, in general, end quicker. Or that just shortens game length or your action the most. Sometimes that's open folding. If you're on the small blind, you have a close hand, it can make sense just to quickly open fold it so that everyone can get dealt the next hand and you can get onto it quicker. Other examples of this is, again, stuff like pre-flop shoving more, right? Shoving is a really quick way to potentially end the hand. When you're heads up, you have those low pocket pairs, and you're trying to decide between, maybe trying to min-raise trap or limp trap or open shove. In the lower prize pools, it's going to be much more worth it just to shove. And, it's quicker, it's faster, it's a little higher variance, but that's good because you just want to end those games quicker so you can try to get into the higher prize pool games. Again, don't overdo this. You don't want to turn into a reckless player. Edges are really important, and those minimum prize pool games are very important to your overall bankroll and your overall profits. So, don't take them, callously. But at the same time, the idea is if you really want to maximize your hourly and make the most money you can from these games, part of that is going to be kind of playing around a little bit with this variance. And so again, similarly, pre-flop, you're going to want to shove more and actually fold more because it's quick. And then post-flop, you're going to want to you can get away with hero calling and thin value betting a little more often because it's higher variance, and that's when you really want to do some of those kind of actions. So, all right, so that's sort of how prize pools affect things. Another really common thing to think about is multi-tabling. How many tables should I be playing? One really important thing to notice is that they are easier to multi-table than heads-up sit-and-goes. Because three-handed play is a little bit slower, there will be spots where, you open fold the button and you don't have to do anything for a few minutes, or a few seconds. It is easier to multi-table them. That being said, it's not that much easier. It's still significantly harder than other formats that people like to multi-table, like 6-max or MTTs or really any other format. They're easier than heads-up sit-and-goes, but more difficult than most others because you do end up playing a lot of heads-up. And when you're heads-up, it is very difficult to multi-table because you will have constant stream of decisions that you'll have to make. With all that being said, I really strongly believe that beginners should stick to 1 or 2 tables. I think playing fewer tables has a lot of really big benefits, especially when you're still learning a format, when you're still building confidence. In particular, I've always believed and always stressed to students of mine that one tabling, in most situations, now everyone is different. There are some people who just cannot one table. I'm not talking to you. Play the fewest tables you can sort of play for your personality. But in general, one tabling is the best for learning because you have the most time to focus on applying new concepts, improving your game, learning from your actions, and really staying focused and not being torn by other decisions and being able to really focus and review hands and pay attention to your opponents and learn. Another really big benefit of playing fewer tables is it's going to increase your ROI. I mean, you'll be making fewer mistakes, you'll be playing more focused. Everyone tends to have higher ROIs playing fewer tables rather than more tables. And increasing your ROI, and in general, your in the money percent is really, really helpful because it lowers your variance a lot. So it can make, the game easier, especially again, when you're a beginning player, you don't have as much edge. Every little bit of ROI is really important, and lowering your variance is a really pleasant thing. And at the same time, the other big benefit that can, oftentimes lead to even higher, long-term hourlies, you're often not even missing out on profit by not multi-tabling, because by having a higher ROI, you'll be able to move up in stakes sooner. Higher in the monies let you use slightly more aggressive bankroll management. We're going to be talking about bankroll management later in the series, but I really want to stress that, every little bit counts. And, even though you might be playing, getting a few fewer games per hour, there's a good chance you might be making more money in that hour regardless. And again, you'll be able to move up quicker, which can also lead to more money, in the long term. Moving up tends to be more profitable than adding tables anyway. So, really, in general, a good rule of thumb is that you shouldn't really look to add tables until you feel that the next level is much more difficult and you don't want to move up to the next level. So adding tables is something where, you sort of have moved up a lot and you don't want to move up to the next level or there isn't another level. That's a really good time to start focusing on improving your multi-tabling, adding tables, and being able to get more games per hour. All right, so, we kind of touched on that variance, and I talked about playing fewer tables will lower your variance. How about is the variance? How can we understand the variance? So the first thing is that spin-and-go variance is significantly higher than in heads-up sit-and-goes. There's sort of no way around it. It's a three-handed game, so you just end up not cashing as often. You have a lower in-the-money percent because of playing three-handed. If you were playing a heads-up sit-and-go, on average, you'll be winning a little bit more than 50% of games. In spin-and-goes, you're going to be winning more than 33% of your games. So just, by default, your variance is going to be higher. And so that's really important to just kind of understand. And then, of course, on top of it, these randomized prize pools, while they can add a lot of excitement, they also add variance. I mean, there's that element of you can sort of, run good or bad in what kind of prize pools you're hitting, how often you hit them. And there's even that kind of element of, which prize pools you run good in, almost. You'll find that some days you'll hit really good streaks and you'll, cash in all the big prize pools. And some days you'll cash in only the big prize pools and none of the small ones. And some days it'll be the opposite. And so this does add another sort of layer of variance, which can make, the format overall quite a bit higher in variance. And so all that being said, you will need to be prepared for longer and more intense downswings. But upswings too. I mean, variance has two sides. While, you'll have to deal with more downswings, the upswings are going to be, quicker, more intense, and bigger. You'll have really big winning days sometimes. And, of course, there's that element that you could, any one of these days, hit that highest prize pool and have, the biggest day of your life. So, all that being said, when dealing with variance, it's really important to be sort of honest with yourself and to treat it seriously. Dealing with variance is a really important part of poker and of being sort of a poker player. It's a skill, like every other. If you sort of just don't believe in variance or, think variance is just bad, you really need to re-examine it and understand that variance is another sort of hurdle. It's another skill set that you're going to need to acquire. Dealing with variance is really, really important. And so mental game strength, working on your mental game, improving your mental game processing, your tilt management, your focus levels, all that kind of stuff is really, really crucial to maintaining solid play. And it's solid play that can sometimes lower variance. And so it can really lead to really bad, in these games, you can really get on really bad swings if you're both playing bad and running bad. It can be a really, really bad thing. And so it's really important to focus on that. So there's ways to simulate variance, and sort of by simulating it, you'll be able to better foresee what can happen, what will happen, and how these Spin&Go variance works. And so I strongly recommend you guys download SwongSim. It's a free tool made by 2+2 user MaxCut, which simulates Spin&Go variance and results. It also simulates variance and results in other formats, including heads-up sit-and-goes and I think 6 max and a few other formats. But the sort of main aspect of it is that it's able to simulate these randomized prize pools and print out really pretty graphs and give you really good descriptions of possible downswings and a lot of really good information. So here's a link to find it. This is a link to the post that has the newest version of the SwongSim. MaxCut has been maintaining this. Again, massive kudos to him. Big thanks. I really love your program. Thanks, Philip, for making it and sharing it with the community and making it free. It's highly appreciated. So check out this website. You'll find some more information about it, some instructions, comments, and again, you'll find the latest version if you sort of go to the end of the forum post. So that's sort of the idea, that SwongSim can help you understand this possible spread of results. And you can do it based on different in-the-money percent. In-the-money ends up being the most crucial sort of aspect of profitability and as well as variance. And so you'll be able to sort of play around with different in-the-monies and see how it affects variance as well as profitability. And it also allows for different prize pool structures as well, and allows you to compare the different stakes. It allows you to compare a few different sites as well. So understanding, understanding brings acceptance. And so the more time you spend trying to understand variance, the easier it'll be to deal with it when it happens to you. And so the whole goal is that hopefully this will result in fewer adverse effects in variance. You won't suffer as much from the from the downswings, from the tilts, thinking, oh, am I the only one who's going through this kind of downswing? Well, you'll be able to see. You'll be able to see how common, whether you should have just expected it, or if it is something that's, that maybe is a sign that your win rate isn't quite as good as you thought it was. And that way, hopefully, you can focus on the positive elements of the variance, which is excitement. Variance does bring a lot of excitement to the game and can makes things fresh and interesting. And that's why poker is so exciting and fun for people. That's why you have so many recreational players who just enjoy playing poker. And that element of variance is a very important part of poker, and you can't have poker without it. So the most important thing is to treat it with respect, treat it seriously, and work on it. So let's talk a little bit about predicting your future results. How can we understand how we're going to be doing based on how we've done in the past? With a high variance format, you start running into issues where your actual results, even over pretty big samples, will be terrible predictors of future outcomes. I mean, to give you the perfect example, if you do hit your $90,000 prize pool and you win it, you'll suddenly have a massive ROI, right? I mean, your ROI will be very, very big. You'll see the hourly on that day, and it'll be huge. And that doesn't mean you're going to be winning at that ROI the rest of the time you're playing Spin&Go's. That was a short-term variance. So being able to predict your future outcome using your current results is really important. So there's a couple ways to deal with this and to make the best sort of estimator you can based on your previous results. So the first one is to focus on in the money. When you use in the money to compute your adjusted ROI, and I'll show you how to do that on the next slide, it'll remove the prize pool variance. Essentially, when you just look at how often you're cashing in the games, you can sort of get an idea of how often you sort of expect to cash in future games. And that'll give you an idea of what your sort of effective ROI would be if there was no prize pool variance. And so that's how you can remove that element of prize pool variance from your results, is by using in the money and not your actual ROI. I also strongly recommend not using any of the overlay net adjusted or all-in equity in dollars that, for instance, PT4 provides. It's not going to be accurate, and again, it's going to suffer from this prize pools variance. We'll look at how we can use all-in equity in a second. So the way we can use tracking software to help us is we can use it to compute an all-in adjusted in the money. Again, that's the key, computing a good in the money. And by using all-in equity adjusted chips, you'll be able to remove some of the variance caused in these games, specifically variance caused by all-ins with cards to come. And so, wait a second. And so this is something that sometimes people get a little confused with, how those all-in equity adjusted tracking works. It's really simple. Essentially, whenever you have a hand that ended up with you being all in with some cards to come, whether it's three-way or heads up or whatever, you're all in, you can't do anything else, and all your results depend only on the random outcome of the future cards. In those cases, and only in those cases, your tracking software, rather than giving you the outcome of that event, will give you your expectation value. That is sort of the average outcome if you had done that specific, that specific all-in, an infinite number of times and got the average, and sort of summed them all up, divided by the number of times you did it, and got an average. And so in all those places where you're all in with cards to come, it will just give you that average rather than the outcome. And that's it. All the other hands are exactly the same. If you win a hand without showdown, you'll still have won that. It won't affect all in equity at all. It'll still be counted, but it won't change your all in equity. And of course, this also means it still has variance in it. I mean, it's not going to remove everything. It's not going to adjust for the fact that, obviously it's unlucky when you have pocket kings and your opponent has pocket aces and you're all in. It's still going to give you a negative result for that. Or, if you're, you bet really big on the flop, really big on the turn, and really big on the river with your set, but it turns out that your opponent had a gut shot draw, and he called the big bet on the flop, called the big bet on the turn, and somehow got there on the river. That also isn't going to affect it, unless you are all in on an earlier street. If you get it all in versus your opponent on the flop, for instance, then it'll give you, again, your average expectation. But if you're just, playing poker down to the river, it's not going to change anything. And so, you'll just have to let the variance from those kind of actions even itself out a little bit. But at least you can remove this one element of all-ins. And it is a great indicator. It's not biased. There's no way that, your play can influence how much above or below, whether you're above or below EV. Your play can sometimes affect your sort of possible, like your standard deviation of being below or above. So it can sometimes affect like the magnitude of possibly being above or below. Perfect example is if you open shove every single hand, you'll likely have, be able to be more over EV or more under EV. You'll be both. But again, you're just as likely to be over EV as under EV. You're just as likely to be, 1,000 binds over EV as you are to be 1,000 binds under EV in all-in equity. And so, in that sense, it's not biased. And so you can rely on it for your results. And it will make your results strictly better. It'll make it a strictly better predictor of future results. And, that's what we're talking. So, so the trick that I'm going to be showing you to get the most out of this, to predict your future results the best, is to use both methods together. And that'll give you the best accurate, the best estimate of your future ROI that's available right now. Maybe in some day, they'll come up with new ingenious ways of removing some elements of variance in poker. But for now, using these two methods will get you the best predictor of your future ROI as you can get. It'll still be susceptible to variance. Again, you'll still have that issue of, for instance, you'll still have a little bit of prize pool variance because it won't, you're in the money, doesn't care about which prize pool you're in. And especially if you're sort of doing some of that win rate maximization versus hourly maximization stuff, that can sometimes change your average in the money as well. So it's not going to be able to deal with things like that. And again, it's not going to be able to deal with the fact that, you got kings last 3 hands in a row, but every time your opponent had aces. That kind of stuff, you'll just have to wait for the time where you have aces 3 times in a row and your opponent has kings. But at least you can get closer. And so, again, it's still subject to variance, and it's still subject to sample size. I mean, the more sample you get, the better. The quicker you'll get a better estimate of your future ROI. But using this method will sort of make the most of small samples. You'll get the most information from small samples by removing these two elements of variance. And so it is strictly better for purposes of predicting your future results. So we're going to do a little bit of computation. We're not going to have to do any math. I'm just going to put up some formulas. These are all pretty easy formulas. This is stuff you can put into Excel or just use a calculator and to compute. So here are the different formulas. So given in the money and rake adjusted as decimals. So make sure that, in the money is a percent, rake is a percent. Write them as decimals. So if you have 10%, you write that as 0.1. That's how you can do math on percent the most efficiently. Is always turn percent into decimals. And then at the end, you'll get some decimal, and you can turn that back into a percent. So first off, this is the formula for the adjusted ROI using an in the money. So this is the thing that removes prize pool variance. So your ROI adjusted is just equal to your in the money times, brackets, 1 minus rake. So, so in the case of a $30 spin and go, rake is 5%. So this number would be 95% or 0.95. And then times 3. And then you take that whole number you end up getting.